The respiratory and circulatory systems are explained together because they help support one another. So the respiratory system would be like your lungs and like your breathing. So you take in air, which has oxygen. Oxygen is needed for cellular respiration. And how all your cells receive oxygen is the circulatory system will then deliver it through red blood cells and the network of arteries, veins, and capillaries, which delivers the oxygen to your cells. And then finally, the respiratory system, your lungs will then expel all the waste products, the gases, things like CO2, because you don't want them to build up inside your body. We'll first look at the structure of the respiratory system. So this is where the gas exchange takes place. So you pick up oxygen and then you get rid of carbon dioxide. So the structure is here. Here's a cutaway of a human being. And then you have your nasal cavity and your nostrils. Okay, so your nostrils has tiny little hairs which help filter out dust and pathogens. It also moistens the air before it enters your lungs because you wouldn't want moisture to immediately freeze inside of your lungs. So that's what your nostrils would do. And your pharynx, which is like the back of your throat. Okay, your larynx, which is your voice box. And then your trachea, which is your windpipe. Okay, so imagine like your trachea and your lungs here look like an upside down tree. So like you flip this thing over, okay, it looks like a tree. So how I think of it is like the trachea is like the big tree trunk, and then your right and your left lung are like the canopies of the trees, because once we take a closer look inside, you could see that you have bronchioles and then alveoli, which are like branches and like fruit of the tree. So you'll see that in just a moment. So this is a basic outline of what the respiratory system looks like. You have your right lung. Now let me just point out something. In all anatomy and physiology books, you're gonna see diagrams where you think it's backwards. Like, okay, the right lung is on the left side. Well, it's this person's right lung. Okay, so it's always from the point of view of you looking at a person. Okay, so his right lung is on this side here, and then his left lung is to your right. So just keep that in mind. Here's a better look at what the respiratory system looks like on the inside. So like I said before, the trachea is like, if you imagine your trachea as being like the big tree trunk, and then your left and right lungs are the canopies of the trees, and then within you have your bronchi, which is where there's, pretend this is like a fork in the road here. There's like two different pathways. You have your left bronchi, which goes over here, and then your right bronchi on this side. Okay, and so those are your big tree branches, and then you have bronchioles, which are smaller tree branches. Okay, and then if you were to zoom in, you would see that, okay, you have alveoli, which kind of look like fruit on the ends of your trees. Okay, and so all this does is it just increases the surface area of your lungs. Okay, I think if you were to stretch out all the surface area, all the tissue and stuff in your lungs, you would have a surface area about the same size as a tennis court, so that allows you to absorb a lot of oxygen, and it allows you to expel a lot of CO2 at the same time. And it's because of all these folds and all these bronchioles and the alveoli, which are tiny little sacs. Okay, if you were to zoom in, tiny little sacs which have capillaries that exchange oxygen and CO2. There's a muscle in your abdomen. It's seated below your lungs, and it's shaped like an upside down bowl. It's called the diaphragm. So this is important in breathing. So when you inhale, your diaphragm will contract and it's going to pull downwards, which expands your lung cavities. Now, if you take chemistry with me, I would explain a little bit of something called Boyle's law of gases. And what happens is because your lungs expand, the volume has now increased, which causes the pressure inside your lungs to decrease, so it goes down. So because there's less pressure in your lungs, the outside air in the environment is now stronger, and it's going to push its way downwards into your lungs. Okay, so when you inhale, don't think of it as you sucking in the air. It's more like the air pressure difference will cause the air to just rush into your lungs, and it's all because of how the diaphragm moves downwards, allowing your lungs to expand. Okay, so that's inhaling or inspiration, so when you take air in. Now when you exhale, okay, sometimes it's called expiration. So when you exhale, the exact opposite happens. So your diaphragm actually relaxes. It pushes upwards in its normal position here, and then it will cause your lungs to decrease in size. Okay, and so look at this picture here at the top. Look at this picture down here. You can see the lungs. What the artist is trying to tell you here is that the lungs will decrease in size, and when it decreases, the pressure inside the lungs will increase. Okay, so the gases have nowhere else to go but outside, because now the pressure is stronger in your lungs than the outside air environment, and then the air just makes its way out. So we see here the circulatory system just moves blood to different parts of the body, and it really just starts here in your heart. Okay, so your heart's basically a big muscular pump that pumps all the blood where the blood is needed, basically everywhere in your body, including your brain up here. Okay, now the blood circulates through a closed system, and there's about 5 liters of blood in the average human adult, and it takes about a minute for the blood to travel all around the body, deliver all its oxygen. It's going to dump off all the oxygen and then travel back through a network of veins which travel back to the heart. Your lungs will then take in oxygen. It gets oxygenated by the blood being carried around the heart, and then it's going to make its way out of the aorta, which is a big artery above your heart, and then it travels again. It makes its loop around the body. Okay. All right, so there's 3 different types of blood vessels. You have arteries, which carries blood away from the heart. So how I remember this is artery starts with the letter A, and then away also starts with the letter A. So this is oxygen-rich blood, because once the lungs take in oxygen, it's going to transfer the oxygen to the red blood cells, which then travel away from the heart, and it gets delivered to all the cells in your body. Okay, now in every medical textbook, they're going to use the color red to show you that the blood has been oxygenated. Now, blood inside your body doesn't appear blue. Okay, it's just a visual reference for people learning or explaining this stuff here. So blue just means it's oxygen poor blood. Okay, blood appears more red in color, and it does not look blue. Okay, so it's a misconception, because some people will look at their wrist and they're like, wait, my veins right there look like it's like bluish, like green almost underneath my skin. Well, the reason why is because you have fats underneath the layer of your skin, and the fats are the thing that are, it's a thing that absorbs certain wavelengths of light, and it makes your veins appear blue. Okay, so the blue light gets reflected, and then you think that the veins are actually blue. Okay, but really it's just the fatty substances in your skin that are like blocking the light, and it's doing something with the light. Okay, and so again, arteries carries blood away from the heart. Veins carry blood back to the heart. Okay, so again, oxygen poor blood needs to be reoxygenated, so the veins would do that. It's going to carry it back to the heart, where you get the pulmonary cycle with the lungs. The lungs will reoxygenate the blood, and then it goes to the heart again, and the heart would then pump the blood back out to the rest of the body through starting with the aorta. And then finally you have capillaries, which are the smallest types of vessels. Okay, and this is where materials can then diffuse in and out of cells, any metabolites that might be in the blood, carbon dioxide and oxygen. So this is where the exchange occurs in capillaries. Okay, and it's thick enough, or actually you could even say it's narrow in that it only allows one red blood cell to fit through its passage here, the capillary. Now keep in mind, the circulatory system also does 2 other things. So it's going to collect waste materials from digestion and metabolism, breaking down food and proteins and other metabolites. Okay, and then it's going to take that blood and then transfer it to the kidney and the liver, so then it gets filtered out by those two organs there. Okay, we'll explain the kidneys probably in the excretory segment. I'll have a different video for that. And then the liver is really a part of the digestive system. But again, there's a lot of overlap between these systems. You can even make or draw an angle from the nervous and endocrine system and have it related to the circulatory and respiratory system somehow. Okay, so again, don't think of these as isolated systems, organ systems that are just working on their own. There's a lot of overlap between them. Okay, and the other thing that the circulatory system does is it helps maintain body temperature. Okay, so for example, when you're starting to overheat and you're doing exercise or something like that, some people will blush, and that's because your blood vessels will expand. It's called vasodilation. So then the blood vessels come nearer to the surface of your skin, and then it dissipates some of the heat that way. So respiration and gas exchange. Okay, this is a model of gas exchange which occurs in the alveoli. Okay, remember the alveoli are the tiny little sacs on the ends of the bronchioles inside your lungs. And again, they're clustered like this, so then it creates a lot of surface area. Okay, and here's a cutaway view of a blood vessel system here, capillaries most likely, which are on the alveoli. So they're zooming in and they're showing you, okay, once you get your oxygen from the pulmonary system here, the oxygen gets delivered and it gets carried away by the red blood cells, and then any excess carbon dioxide gets dumped out, and then when you exhale, the CO2 leaves your body that way. Certain diseases interfere with gas exchange. It makes it harder for you to breathe. Okay, there's a disease called emphysema. It's caused by smoking. Emphysema causes mucus in the bronchioles. You get enlarged alveoli and there's less capillaries, so you always feel tired and it feels as if you're not getting enough air. And I imagine it's a very tough condition to live with, and it's caused again by smoking, which causes inflammation and mucus buildup in the lungs. Okay, and so here's someone with emphysema, okay, and here's what a normal bronchiole and alveoli look like. So they're not swollen. There's a lot of capillaries which facilitate the exchange of carbon dioxide and oxygen. Asthma, okay, very common. So here's what a normal bronchiole looks like. Okay, these are like, again, the small little tree branches that come off your larger bronchioles. Okay, and so a normal bronchiole is wide. Okay, it allows for a lot of air to rush through. But someone with asthma has inflammation of the bronchioles and it gets swollen, and you can see now it's a narrow passageway. So asthma just causes, you know, people to feel tired, or you can't get enough oxygen. It's probably a very suffocating feeling. Now, certain things trigger asthma, things like pollen, dust mites, mold, pet dander, and smoke or chemicals. All right, and here's a healthy lung of a non-smoker. Okay, it's fresh and it's pink, and this is someone who smokes, so it's covered in like soot and like ash. It's swollen, and it just looks overall not good. Okay, like there's no way you can get efficient transfer of or exchange of gases with a lung that looks like this. Now I'm going to describe something called pulmonary circulation. So this is how your heart receives oxygenated blood from your lungs. Okay, so let's start here with the lungs. So then you breathe in, okay, and you take in oxygen. Now let's look at the blood flow towards the heart and then away from the heart. So again, like how I explained earlier, medical textbooks will always use blue to denote where oxygen poor blood is located. Now you have two big veins, okay? There is a superior vena cava and there is the inferior vena cava. So the superior vena cava delivers blood to the heart from anywhere above your heart, okay? Your inferior vena cava is anywhere below the heart, okay? So all all blood that is oxygen poor will return through these two veins here. Okay, so the blood is received in the right atrium. Okay, so again, there's 4 chambers in your heart. You have the right atrium, the right ventricle, the left atrium, and the left ventricle. So those are the 4 chambers of the heart. Well, the blood is going to flow in this way in the right atrium. Then, every heartbeat. I'm not going to go over every little detail here, but it causes blood to go into the next chamber here, the right ventricle. And from the right ventricle, your heart will contract, and it's going to pump the blood out of something called the pulmonary artery. So it's going to carry blood away from your heart. So now the blood will then make its way into the lungs. Okay, so as you breathe, the gas exchange occurs, and now the blood is going to come back in to your heart, okay, through the pulmonary veins, okay, so where it's now been oxygenated. So you can see here, you follow this loop, it's going to come back in. Now it's oxygenated. It has oxygen, makes its way into the left atrium, okay, through the bicuspid valve, into the left ventricle, and then back out again. So once the heart beats again, or it contracts, it's going to pump the blood back out your aorta, which is one of the largest arteries in your body. And from the aorta, it's going to deliver the blood to the rest of the body. So then it makes a full loop, okay, through your shoulder, your hands, whatever, okay, wherever the blood is needed, pretty much everywhere in your body. It flows all throughout your body. It takes a minute to make a full loop. And then once all the oxygen has been dumped off, it's then going to return through the vena cava again, and the superior vena cava, where it goes to the right atrium, right ventricle, through the pulmonary arteries, where it receives a fresh supply of oxygen, travels back into the heart from the lungs, okay, left atrium, left ventricle, and then aorta. Okay, so here, if the diagram here kind of throws you off, okay, you can just kind of follow this right here and then try to make sense of it that way. So right atrium through the tricuspid valve, right ventricle, the heart contracts, sends the blood to the lungs, and in the lungs it gets oxygenated again. It travels from the lungs back out to the pulmonary veins through the left atrium, bicuspid valve, left ventricle, and then through the aorta, okay, where it travels through the arteries. Okay, the arteries again starts with the letter A, so it carries blood away from the heart, and then the gas exchange in the capillaries, okay, and the oxygen gets dumped off there to any cells that need it, and then any oxygen poor blood is then delivered back to the heart through your veins, okay. And again, you have the inferior vena cava and superior vena cava. Okay, superior means above the heart, inferior means below. So this last section is just on minor things about the circulatory system that you might find interesting. So we'll describe blood pressure first. I feel like no one ever talks about blood pressure, or they never really talk about what the numbers mean. So for example, like when you go to the doctors and you get your blood pressure measured with this, they'll put like a cuff around your arm, and then it will start to inflate and it feels like it's constricting. You'll get 2 numbers from that. So let's say your blood pressure is 120 over 70, okay, and the doctor just tells you that, and you're like, okay, cool, but no one ever really explains. Okay, so the top number is known as the systolic pressure, and this is when your heart contracts. So obviously when something is pumping or contracting, it's under a higher pressure. So this is 120 for your blood pressure, and the units of pressure are millimeters of mercury. It's more of like a chemistry thing, so don't worry too much about the units. Okay, so 120 is your blood pressure when your heart contracts, and then diastolic pressure is the bottom number, and this is the pressure when the ventricle relaxes. So when you have a high blood pressure, it's really because of plaque, like cholesterol and like fats building up in your blood vessels, so then it narrows the passageway. And if there's blockage in your arteries, then your heart has to work a lot harder to pump that blood. Okay, so this is when you get heart problems because you're overworking your heart. Okay, because there's been plaque that's building up on the inside walls of your artery. Here's a cutaway view of a normal healthy artery with no blockage. But if you eat like a lot of like fatty foods, okay, it's going to cause breakage in your arteries, and now the fatty deposits make their way in, and it's going to cause your artery to become blocked, okay, and then you'll get blood clots where you're not supposed to have them. And again, this will cause a lot of strain on your heart as it works harder to pump the blood. So here's the composition of blood. Okay, when you put a sample of blood in a test tube and then you put it in something called a centrifuge, which is a machine that spins the test tube around thousands of times per minute, it's going to separate, and then what you get is plasma, okay, which is a watery fluid. It contains like dissolved substances and stuff in there, things like salt. White blood cells and platelets make up about 1% of that, and then your red blood cells make up the remainder, okay, which is about 45%. Okay, so the red blood cells again have hemoglobin in them, which help trap oxygen, and then your red blood cells deliver the oxygen to other parts of your body. White blood cells and platelets are a part of your immune system. Okay, so the plasma again is mostly just water, and it includes other molecules that help maintain homeostasis. And then keep in mind you have small little molecules or cell bodies called platelets that control bleeding. So they form clots. Let's say you get a cut in your artery or something, or some sort of blood vessel, and it's causing leakage. What a platelet will do is it comes by and it causes a positive feedback where it will tell fibrin to bunch up and capture your blood vessels, just round up everything, and it creates a clot, okay, which plugs up the hole. And a really minor piece, which is often overlooked in the circulatory system, is your lymphatic system, which is I would describe it as something that bridges the gap between your circulatory system and your immune system. So the lymph just collects or lymph is fluid that's collected from tissues, and it's returned to the circulatory system. So your lymphatic system is just a network of like organs and vessels and nodes that are in your body. Here are some examples. You have nodes in your armpits, and then underneath your chin in your throat area. So whenever you're feeling sick, or like you feel like you're about to get sick, that's why you start to feel pain in these nodes, or they become inflamed, because there is an excess of fluid that's starting to make its way into those nodes. And what the lymph does is it filters and it traps bacteria, viruses, fungus, and other cell fragments, okay, which is why there's inflammation in those parts, right? Like, let's say like you're about to get the flu, or like you have a cold or something, you'll feel your throat getting sore, and then there's this little area underneath your chin, about right here, it gets inflamed, and you can actually touch it and you can feel it, and it's getting larger right there. And then same with like your armpits, you'll feel like some pain there as well. And like I mentioned before, the lymphatic system is a big part of the immune system. Your tonsils, your thymus, and your spleen are also a part of the immune system, and it helps the body defend itself from pathogens. It filters pathogens, and it also produces white blood cells called lymphocytes that attack pathogens. So more on that later on once we get to the immune system. But again, the big takeaways are all of these organ systems are interconnected. You can't study them as isolated pieces, and that's because they help maintain homeostasis.